So, when people try to say, well, you have to sound like this in order to be in this category of music, rock and roll, well, what is that? I don't know. I mean, I never thought of myself as a rock and roll singer. I thought of myself as a singer.
She's dazzled the world with her voice, defied industry norms, and built a legacy across genres few dared to cross. Yet Linda Ronstadt has long kept one part of her story just out of reach. Fans have speculated for years, reading between the lines of interviews and lyrics. Now, for the first time, she's confirming what many quietly suspected. What drove one of music's most iconic voices to make a choice that seemed to go against everything fame and love promised her? The truth is layered, personal, and more revealing than anyone expected. A bicultural beginning in Tucson. Linda Ronstadt was born in Tucson, Arizona, into a family where music was more than just a pastime. It was a way of life. Her father, Gilbert Ronstadt, of German and Mexican descent, ran a hardware store, but was also an amateur singer with a deep appreciation for traditional Mexican music. Her mother, Ruth Mary Copeman, came from a British-American background and was a homemaker with a love for classical music. The Ronstadt household was immersed in musical influences ranging from mariachi and ranchera to jazz and classical opera, creating a unique cultural blend that profoundly shaped Linda's artistic identity from a young age. Growing up in this rich musical environment, Linda was exposed to a wide array of genres that many young American singers wouldn't typically encounter. Her father would sing traditional Mexican canciones, while her mother played Gilbert and Sullivan operettas on the family record player. She also had access to American pop standards and folk music, all of which she absorbed with keen interest. Linda often credited her father's mariachi singing and her family's backyard performances as the earliest seeds of her passion for music. By her early teens, she had already begun performing locally, experimenting with harmony and instrumentation. Inspired by artists such as Hank Williams, Lola Beltran, and Edith Piaf, she began to fuse the stark narrative of country and folk with the emotive depth of Mexican ballads. Those early music experiments came to a head in forming an association with Bob Kimmel and Kenny Edwards in a music group known as the Stone Poneys in Los Angeles, an important step to take her into national prominence with the recording of Different Drum. But the roots of that sound emotional, eclectic, and borderless must have been traced unmistakably to a bicultural upbringing in Tucson. Even as Ronstadt morphed into a pop and rock icon, she never divorced herself completely from the music of her heritage. For instead of trying to sell albums, they were his homage to his roots through Canciones de mi Padre and Más Canciones, which she recorded in the 1980s and 1990s, collections of traditional Mexican songs that honored her father's legacy and, at the time, became America's best-selling non-English language records. Linda's story was just beginning, and the next chapter would take her far beyond Tucson's desert skies. From Stone Poneys to stardom, Linda Ronstadt's rise to fame began with a leap of faith when, in the mid-1960s, she left the University of Arizona and her familiar life in Tucson to pursue a musical career in Los Angeles. Encouraged by her then-boyfriend and fellow musician Bob Kimmel, Linda moved west to immerse herself in the city's thriving folk rock scene. In LA, she and Kimmel teamed up with Kenny Edwards to form the Stone Poneys, a folk trio that aimed to blend harmonies and acoustic sensibilities with the growing popularity of rock. Their sound resonated with the moment, and they quickly gained attention within the local club circuit. The group's breakthrough came in 1967 with the release of their second album, Evergreen Volume 2, which featured the song Different Drum, written by Michael Nesmith of the Monkees. Although the band was relatively unknown at the time, the song's innovative mix of Baroque pop and country influences, along with Ronstadt's emotionally charged vocal performance, captivated listeners. Interestingly, Different Drum was produced using session musicians, with Ronstadt as the only band member featured on the recording, an early indication of her singular talent and commercial appeal. The song reached number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100, marking Linda's first major national exposure. The Stone Poneys, which began as a small Los Angeles folk rock outfit, shifted from an occasional hit and miss on the fringe of fame into some serious spotlight. Once Ronstadt's inconceivable initial success with a personal project called Different Drum signified quite a step into her transition into a full-blown solo thing. After the initial increased fame of the Stone Poneys, they dissolved what was left of the band due to artistic disagreements, Ronstadt's ever-expanding stardom, and, consequently, the birth of Linda from there. Solo in the early 70s, in her own way with the Capitol Records stamp on it, some straddling country rock with folk throwbacks to her vocal strength and musical background, really seemed to set Linda apart as one of the most promising young artists in the industry. As she evolved creatively, Ronstadt began to work with and incorporate some of the brightest stars of the Southern California rock scene, including Eagles members who had been in and out of her backing band. Virtuously blending genres and reaching the audience emotionally, Ronstadt cemented her place in the American musical canvas, a woman in a man's world. In the 1970s, rock and roll was overwhelmingly dominated by male performers, bands, and producers. But Linda Ronstadt carved out a powerful space for herself, becoming one of the few women to achieve superstar status in the genre. Her fusion of country, rock, and pop resonated widely with audiences, allowing her to ascend rapidly in a field where female artists were often sidelined. Unlike many of her contemporaries, Ronstadt didn't just survive in the male-dominated rock world, she conquered it. Her commercial breakthrough came with a string of platinum albums in the mid to late 1970s, including Heart Like a Wheel, 1974, Prisoner in Disguise, 1975, and Simple Dreams, 1977. These albums featured chart-topping hits such as You're No Good, When Will I Be Loved, and Blue Bayou, showcasing both her vocal prowess and her keen ability to interpret songs across multiple genres. As her popularity surged, Ronstadt graced the covers of Time, Rolling Stone, and Newsweek, an accomplishment that was virtually unheard of for a female solo rock artist at the time. The media often dubbed her the Queen of Rock and the First Lady of Rock, titles that underscored her singular status in the music industry. The road traveled by Ronstadt amidst great acclaim was not without snags. Sexism and an industry-wide resistance impeded Ronstadt's path concerning everything from production to management. Double standards flew into full view during her verbal rants against male industry practitioners, whom she accused of depriving her of opportunities. In contrast, she claimed that she had to prove herself twice over to gain equal recognition. Neither did she submit to the pressures of being defined, nor did she allow herself to be sycophantic. Artistic input was lavished on all her artistic choices, whether in the selection of collaborators, managing the scheduling of tours, or pursuing diverse genres. Her contributions were far-reaching, affecting the lives of female artists for future generations. The visibility and success of Linda Ronstadt made the point that women could not only find their way to the forefront of rock, but also do so without compromising their own identities and artistry. By the late 1970s, she was more than just a star. She was a cultural icon and an emblem of female empowerment, love, loss, and loneliness. Though Linda Ronstadt was one of the most recognizable figures in the music industry, her personal life often stood in contrast to her public fame. Over the years, she was romantically linked with several high-profile men, including singer-songwriter J.D. Souther, California Governor Jerry Brown, comedian Jim Carrey, and filmmaker George Lucas. These relationships were the subject of much media speculation, especially her time with Brown, which made headlines in the 1970s when the couple appeared together on magazine covers. Ronstadt was refreshingly candid when speaking about love and relationships. She often said that while she deeply valued love, compatibility was far more difficult to find. In various interviews, she revealed her struggle to meet someone who shared both her musical passion and emotional temperament. She explained that some partners were kind but lacked artistic inspiration, while others were creatively stimulating but emotionally volatile or egotistical. You meet someone who's so musically inspired, it takes your breath away, but he's such a jerk you can't live with him, she once said, summarizing the complex emotional calculus behind her romantic decisions. She'd been thinking all this time that marriage could never have been a requirement for a complete life. Ronstadt knew she was simply not cut out for the compromises involved in marriage. In her opinion, speaking to the Washington Post, she would say, "I honestly have no talent for marriage and wouldn't want to live her entire life adjusting to another person's needs." Her fiercely independent spirit, which served her well in her career, is also the motivating factor for her remaining single. Instead of getting validation from a traditional formalized partnership, Ronstadt poured all her energies into music, her kids, and forming a great life on her own terms. Ronstadt did not seem, however, to portray her single state as one of loss or regret. She subsequently adopted 2 children, a daughter, Mary Clementine, and a son, Carlos, and invested her efforts in being a good mother to them and in family life. In later interviews, she has been quoted as talking about her choices with clarity and confidence, with no longing for what might have been. In her world, love was never about following the acceptable social traditions, but being true, related, and honest. Still, Linda's next chapter would prove that fulfillment can take a far less conventional route. Choosing single motherhood. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, at the height of her fame, Linda Ronstadt made a life-changing decision that would redefine her personal identity.
And I feel that way about music. If I haven't heard it when I was a little child, I can't approach it with any kind of authenticity.
She chose to become a single mother. She adopted 2 children, Mary Clementine in 1990 and Carlos in 1994, opting to build a family on her own terms rather than wait for the right partner to come along. This move was both unconventional and courageous at the time, especially in the world of celebrity, where public scrutiny often surrounds personal choices. Ronstadt's decision to adopt was rooted in her deep love for children and her belief in creating a nurturing, stable environment. After years of touring, recording, and living under the constant spotlight, she yearned for a more grounded existence, one where she could focus on caregiving and personal growth rather than the demands of fame or a romantic relationship. She split her time between San Francisco and her hometown of Tucson, Arizona, seeking balance and a sense of normalcy for her children. When asked about motherhood in interviews, Ronstadt would say it was all joy and transformation. She had literally done everything in her professional career, from Grammys to platinum records and critical acclaim, but she admitted that bringing up her kids was her biggest achievement. She mothered alone in a very private and fabulous way. Away from the eyes of Hollywood, she fed the kids with an enriching and instructive experience involving music, art, and their Mexican-American heritage. Ronstadt, of all people, had chosen single motherhood, not as one born of selfishness, but as a soft statement of independence. She had no use for society's acceptance, nor was she one to flaunt her defiance at anyone's face. She just followed her own instincts, because that was yet another proof that living from the heart was her guiding principle. In so doing, she proved that family could be defined as one likes, and that a life of love, purpose, and happiness does not need to follow conventional tracks. Leaving the spotlight, finding herself. Linda Ronstadt's views on love were as nuanced as her music. Though she experienced deep emotional connections with several high-profile partners, she often described a recurring dilemma. The people who inspired her creatively were rarely emotionally compatible. "You meet someone who's so musically inspired that it takes your breath away," she once said. "But he's such a jerk, such a maniac, that you can't get along with him." For Ronstadt, romantic perfection always seemed elusive, a search for someone who could match her intensity without chaos and stability without dullness. Rather than settle, she leaned into solitude, guided by a fiercely independent spirit that shaped every corner of her life. She openly admitted, "I have no talent for marriage," and preferred to live without the compromises that came with long-term relationships. Her refusal to conform to conventional expectations of love or partnership wasn't about isolation. It was a choice rooted in clarity. Ronstadt's life offered a refreshing counter-narrative. That strength and wholeness can exist without romantic validation, and that self-knowledge is its own form of intimacy. A vision continued to guide her through the land of Hollywood, and she found herself running from almost in the height of her stardom. The obsession of the entertainment world with image, status, and ego stood in stark contrast with Ronstadt's solid and conventional values. So she left Los Angeles because she was searching for a lifestyle in which she could have more privacy, stimulation, and artistic freedom. There she found a rhythm of life involving creativity, motherhood, and activism, far from the cameras and closer to her heart. Eventually coming back full circle to Tucson, the childhood city that had shaped her initially.
They have a footing in my childhood. I always say that I never sang any style of music that I hadn't heard in my household growing up.
Ronstadt returned not only to escape fame, but also to reconnect with her heritage, keeping her children away from the media attention, while valuing a life of substance over image. In so doing, she redefined success, not concerning album sales and movie deals, but more with the quiet courage to abandon anything that did not resonate with her heart anymore. The cruel silence. In 2013, Linda Ronstadt publicly revealed that she had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a life-altering condition that had already taken a devastating toll on her greatest gift, her voice. Fans around the world were shocked to learn that one of the most powerful vocalists of her generation could no longer sing. Ronstadt explained that she had started experiencing symptoms years earlier, such as tremors and difficulty controlling pitch, but initially dismissed them as signs of aging or a result of a past tick-borne illness. Eventually, doctors confirmed the heartbreaking diagnosis, bringing an abrupt end to her singing career. The loss of her voice was more than a professional setback. It was a deeply personal tragedy. Singing had always been Ronstadt's primary mode of expression, a core part of her identity since childhood. In interviews, she described the feeling as a cruel irony, a lifetime of discipline and musical mastery undone by a disease that robbed her of the very muscles needed to sing. "I can't sing a note," she admitted, yet despite the grief, she faced the condition with characteristic grace, refusing to let it define her entirely. Her resilience became a quiet but powerful extension of her strength as an artist and individual. In one of her most poignant reflections, Ronstadt remarked, "I can sing in my brain." She shares that she hears the melodies inside and that the internal performance continues without the body's involvement. This simple yet profound statement conveys how music is so deeply entrenched in her being that not even a neurological illness can silence it completely. Ronstadt said, "Sometimes she selects the song. At other times, the song will select her. Even in silence, music is an ever-present friend." Since then, Ronstadt's moved on to advocacy and awareness with self-reflection. She has begun to openly discuss the challenges that come when living with Parkinson's, such that the stigma around it can be a bit eased, encouraging others to speak up about similar challenges in their lives. The music may have quieted, but Linda Ronstadt's story was far from over. The voice that knew no borders. Linda Ronstadt's career is a masterclass in musical boundary breaking. Rising to fame in the 1970s as a rock and country rock artist, she never let genre define her. From the aching ballads on Heart Like a Wheel to the electrifying interpretations of pop standards and soulful country covers, Ronstadt approached every musical style with fearless curiosity and emotional honesty. Her success was not simply a result of vocal talent. It stemmed from a deep respect for the cultural roots of every genre she explored, and a refusal to be boxed in by commercial trends. In the 1980s, Ronstadt made a stunning pivot into operetta and Broadway, starring as Mabel in The Pirates of Penzance and later appearing in La Bohème, despite having no formal operatic training. Her collaborations with conductor Nelson Riddle on lush orchestral albums brought the American songbook back into vogue, bridging generational gaps and reaffirming the emotional power of mid-century standards. These ventures, unconventional for a pop artist at the time, not only showcased her vocal versatility, but also her commitment to artistry over convenience. However, her most intimate artistic leap came in the form of Canciones de mi Padre, 1987, and Más Canciones, 1991, Spanish-language albums deeply rooted in her Mexican heritage. These were not side projects, but were cultural statements. At that time, Canciones de mi Padre became the best-selling non-English language album in America, proving that a serious audience would respond to folk Latin music played with respect and skill. Critics and fans were both repelled by the fact that Ronstadt sang not just as an artist, but as an honoree, lifted up by heredity. Music historian Ann Powers stated aptly that Ronstadt allowed the border to sing, paving the way for artists like Selena, Shakira, and Rosalia to find crossover success. This legacy is open to styles and shines forth a larger truth. Ronstadt did not never sell out. She remained a loud, wattage-intense voice in favor of immigrant rights and feminism, and she was unyielding about it even when it meant not being popular. Her National Medal of Arts and her induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2014 thus rewarded not only an immortal voice, but also one of the most rebellious women in the history of music. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more untold moments from music legends. And don't go just yet. Watch the next video on your screen to dive even deeper into the lives of the stars you love.